Welcome back to LEXi 101, your jumpstart on how to use the OR LEXi strategy to trade the opening range breakout. Now here we have a chart in TradeStation, and we have an analysis technique which shows our OR high, which we're going to turn on, and it shows an OR high on this date, and it also shows that it didn't quite contain the price bar at 10.05. That is, the high of the first bar was exceeded at 10.05, but it's not a true opening range breakout. In our previous lesson, we saw that you could avoid such a head fake. If we were to turn our strategy on, we see the problem. We get an entry on this bar, and we probably don't want that entry. Now, one way to avoid that entry is to use a specific amount for profit confirm, and we were using, let's say, a nickel, which would be 0.05 cents. And when we do that, you see that our OR LEXi entry line is moved precisely a nickel above the line. You know what? We could make it 3 cents to get just about there, but we would have to make this adjustment on every chart and every different stock kind of differently, because 1 cent might not be enough, 3 cents. To avoid that problem, we talked about using the alternative offset, which is the one below it, called the entry ATR percentage. Now, before we do that, we have to be aware that it's using the average true range calculation, and it's going to need a certain number of days of data for that calculation. And if we're going to be using 10 days of data, the first thing we're going to want to change before we even get started is make sure that we have at least 10 days of data. You know what? I'm going to give it a few extra days because I'm looking at a trade not on the last trading day. So I'm going to give it 13 days of data. Once I do that, I'm able now to go to my analysis technique, OR high, and say, show me an offset line at 3% of an ATR. And with that offset, you can see when I zoom in here that we're going to then be able to avoid this entry. And what I'm going to want to do is now set LEXi to correspond to that 3%. So instead of the dollar amount, I'm going to say, okay, and for ATR percentages, I don't have to enter a decimal. 3 means 3%. The other thing I'm going to need is my ATR length down below here needs to be a non-zero value, and typically we use 10 days for an ATR. And with those two settings, okay, you see that I avoid the trade. If I were to go back to LEXi and change that 3% to 0%, and let's see, we're in the trade 1 day too soon, so we need 1 day less data in order to see this. So I'm going to go and ask for 12 days, not 13 days. All right. And now we're seeing here that without the offset, with the offset set to 0, we're in the trade, and the green line is right on the OR high. But when we set this ATR percentage to 3, that I accidentally sent the exit. I need to set the entry ATR percentage to 3. We're now no longer entering this trade. Now, another way to avoid this trade, this is called price confirmation, by the way, also known as adding a fudge factor to your OR high to avoid a head fake. Now, instead of using price confirm, I have another confirmation technique, and that's called time confirm. So if we notice here, we are getting in this trade not because we closed this bar, this 5-minute bar, closed above the 5-minute OR high, but because the bar crossed above it during its lifetime, that the high of the bar is above that entry line. Well, we may want to require the bar to close below it, and to do that, we change our we have another thing called entry confirm bars, which we can change to 1. This means we need to get at least one bar to close above that line before we enter. And you can see how this, in this particular case, we avoid that entry. So we have two ways to get a confirmation to make sure we're getting in when we want, and we could also use both, saying we have to have cleared our line by at least 3% of an ATR, and we need to confirm it by having our bar close at least once below our entry line. So we also have similar entries, which we'll cover in detail. For our exits, we have our exit offset amount, a exit offset percentage, and an exit confirm bars. Remember now, when you're using the ATR percentage, you need to have ATR length set to 10, and you need to have 10, 11, 12 days back of data to be able to make the calculation you need to do that 3%. Now one of the next thing we'd like to take a look at is the different entry modes we have. Here we've been looking at a OR breakout. I'm going to set these numbers back to 0. And I'm going to insert another analysis technique, the partner of the OR high show me, which is the OR low. And here we see the 5-minute OR low. Now, I have two entry modes. One is 0, and the other, entry mode of 1, remember 0 is an OR breakout. An entry mode of 1 tells LEXi, I don't want to do an OR breakout, I want to wait for a failed breakdown. Now a failed breakdown, and we got one here, okay, is when you get a bar below the OR low, that's the breakdown, but it doesn't hold. We come back and we cross above the OR low, and that's where our entry is. The other thing to notice about the failed breakdown is you may want to use another input to help confirm, and that is high bars to clear, which you'll find back here. If you say put a 1 here instead of a 0, then instead of getting in on a head fake above, we're going to wait for at least one bar to close above the previous bar above our line before we get in, and notice we're getting in right at the open of this bar. Our other modes, which we went over before, which is say a ATR percentage of 3 and a confirm bar, will also impact where we get in. But in this particular case, we not only were above by 3%, we were also, and our line is showing this green line here, that's our entry line, set now at 3% above the OR low. Remember, before we set the ATR percentage here, it was right on the ATR low. So now we need to fail above it. We also can delay the entry an extra bar if we want by changing the confirm bars to 2. And in this particular case, we did not get 2 confirm bars with each bar above the previous. Remember, we also had